Hey everybody, welcome to the Tech Founder Show. Andy, how the heck are you doing?
I am fantastic. Back from a long weekend, spending hard labor out in the yard. How about you, Tony?
Yeah, some of the same going on over here, but got to enjoy a nice weekend and
Sunny rays.
Memorial Day. Yeah, so that was all good. We have another tech founder here this week. We have Adith Moorthy. He is the CEO and founder of ConserWater. And ConserWater is building the O2C marketplace. It's the world's first international soil carbon offset market. It's enabled by AI. Let me bring him on so he can tell us all about it. Adith, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you for joining. And first of all, before we get started, just tell us a little bit more about ConserWater.
Yeah, so at ConserWater, we are building the world's first truly international soil carbon offset marketplace. So what that means is we are providing corporations and governments the opportunity to buy carbon removal, removing CO2 from the atmosphere at the lowest cost, while helping farmers around the world to increase soil carbon, sequestering CO2 from the atmosphere effectively, but also improving their livelihoods. They are able to increase their incomes, and they're able to grow more with less in the future from doing that. So according to the UN IPCC, soil carbon, storing carbon in the soils of the world is one of the lowest cost and also one of the largest ways to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And we are enabling it through our technology. Like historically, it's been very hard to do because it's been very hard to quantify things, measure things on the ground. And now we're able to use satellites along with AI to measure soil carbon directly. And by doing that, we're able to enable this to happen on a global scale and enable carbon removal to actually be unlocked, measured and unlocked on a global scale in this way, and bring both the corporations who want carbon removal and the farmers who are able to provide it at low cost. And you might have seen from the news that ESG is all the vogue right now, and a lot of companies are focusing a lot on their carbon footprint, on environmental justice, social justice, all those aspects. And we bring it all together and enabling that to happen while helping the planet.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I'm kind of curious. How did you even get into this? And what's your story?
Yeah, so it actually started out a few years ago, back in 2016. Actually, I was traveling through a small village actually in South India. I was traveling through a small village in South India, and I saw a funeral procession. A farming family had committed suicide because that year the monsoon rains had failed, and as a result, the crop yields had collapsed. And that got me thinking. Due to climate change, there's a lot of things happening, but of course, first off, the farmers are really suffering. Why do they need to struggle like this in the face of climate change, and why do they need to lose their lives like this due to the increasing droughts that are occurring and increasing flooding as well that's occurring, or increasing wildfires here in California? Why are farmers struggling? Is there anything that they can do to fight back against that? And that's how we started. But we didn't start on the carbon sequestration side first. So we started on the water side, which is why our name is ConserWater, on helping farmers to grow more with less water. And in fact, here's a latest scoop for your listeners, I guess, is we are in the process of actually rebranding and changing our name to Bhu Mitra. Bhu Mitra. That means a friend of the earth in Sanskrit. So we are in the process of changing our name in sync with a huge funding round we're almost closing in like the next few weeks. So we are in a inflection point ourselves. But so far, like we started out on the water side. We've been helping thousands of farmers. Then we kind of shifted the business model to helping to accelerate carbon removal using the same kinds of technology, and that's where we're headed. Sustainability, broadly and enabling large-scale carbon removal and large-scale ecosystem restoration and large-scale sustainability around the world. That's what we stand for. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, there's so many things to talk about and unpack. I'm kind of curious what drove the shift from the focus on water to carbon, and how you went through that evolution of change.
Yeah. So so we started out on the water side, right? And we built that for a while. But from the beginning, like as a founder, my vision has always been, how do we get to the 100 million farmers of the world? How do we get to all the farmers? How do we get to a really, really large scale? And what is the best ways to do that? What is the best ways to achieve scale? I guess I'm starting to just sound like a typical Silicon Valley person now, but really, like this is the vision. How do you reach scale? How do you reach scale around the world? And that is an interesting question to think about. And basically we've been studying it for a while on how do we do that. And we've tried a variety of different things, a variety of different business models, a variety of different go-to-market strategies on how to do that. And with the water product, we managed to reach like a few thousand farmers around the world that are using it across all the inhabited continents. But then what we quickly realized is that the growth trajectory is only linear. Is there any way that we can kind of get that J curve going? Or at least an S curve until we reach many millions, right? So that's what we need. That's what startups need. That's how you build a fast-growing startup. So how do we do that? And that's when we started thinking about different models, and we started thinking about how we can really drive both the business objectives while driving sustainability objectives while really scaling. And that's where the carbon model comes in. So the carbon model, we were able to easily shift into that because we had the key technologies already from what we'd been developing from water, which is actually quite related to carbon, actually, it turns out, scientifically. So the key technologies were already there. The key software is already there. And the key partners and the key sales channels and the key partners are already there on the ground, doing things from this point of view. And we just sort of shift them to a slightly different model with the carbon. And we did that. And I guess it's still a work in progress. I'd say it's not 100%. All of the partners have not completely transitioned to the new model yet, but we have been able to do that. And because there's so much overlap between what we were doing before, but then in this model, the entire business model is shifted, and that's the benefit. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how do we reach the 100 million farmers of the world. We believe the easiest way to bring technology to the 100 million farmers of the world, advanced technology, is actually by paying them, incentivizing them to do the right thing. And there's a huge interest now in carbon removal. There's a huge interest in withdrawing emissions from the atmosphere, avoiding and offsetting and removing CO2 from the atmosphere. There's a huge interest. Be able to capitalize on that, which is actually $100 billion worth of interest. Globally, carbon is being traded at that level already. And of course, it's going to go bigger because we are all very worried about how do we actually reduce climate change and stop contributing to the problem. So it's going to go bigger. There's a huge demand. There's a huge number of farmers out there that we're able to scale to faster than ever because of the shifted business model where we're able to incentivize them and enable them to do better without charging them monetarily because they're being paid through the carbon credits. And then we facilitate all of this, and we obviously make a commission off the transactions on the actual creation and generation and sale of carbon credits. That's why it's sort of like a marketplace. But we are enabling this entire thing, and we're enabling a large-scale climate action.
So, Adith, would you be able to explain a little bit of the technology that you guys use and like what you're doing, just to simplify it a bit?
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So the conventional way of measuring things on Earth, on the planet, is usually to go do a soil sample or some sample of a plant sample or something of that sample and send it to a local lab and get it tested in a lab. That is a typical way to measure environmental outcomes. As a typical way that soil properties and many plant properties are usually measured. What we are doing is we're able to use satellites throughout the entire electromagnetic spectrum. And what that means is things that we can see: visible light, infrared light, microwaves, wavelengths like what your phone uses to communicate, radar, what the weather stations use to measure rain, all those wavelengths. There are satellites that measure all those things. We're able to use those kinds of satellites throughout the entire electromagnetic spectrum, both public and private satellites, and then study the Earth, measure what is happening from the Earth. But then, of course, what a satellite sees is sort of like what your camera on your phone sees. It only sees a count of the pixels. It only sees the count of the brightness of the pixels measured on each pixel on your camera, right? Same things measured by a satellite. It's a raw number. We're able to use AI to convert that raw number into actionable information. Converting the raw numbers of what the satellites see into actionable information about things that are relevant to understand about the Earth, be it soil carbon levels. In our case, with the carbon, we are measuring soil carbon levels on every single field within a 10 meter, 30 feet resolution. We're able to measure that, and then use that information to then go back and quantify how soil carbon is increasing over time as farmers sequester CO2 from the atmosphere. And that increase in soil carbon, that's CO2 sequestration, carbon removal. So we're able to turn that increase in carbon into a certified carbon credit to relevant international standards, and then sell that. So the technology really is the ability to quantify that, and to quantify not just soil carbon, but also soil moisture and other nutrients as well, which we do, but quantify these environmental variables to a high enough degree of accuracy to enable both the farmers to grow more with less, and also to enable increase in soil carbon, driving climate action, and driving CO2 removal, carbon removal from the atmosphere, and achieving these environmental outcomes. That's all possible with our kind of a general purpose kind of technology to measure these environmental outcomes from the Earth.
Very cool. It doesn't sound like this is something that started as like a side hustle. I would be curious to hear what your professional background was, before you dove into this.
Well, okay. So it did actually start as a side hustle, I would say. It did actually start as a side hustle. So so I actually founded this company when I was initially founded, like in 2016, when I was still in undergrad, actually in college. So I graduated from the California Institute of Technology with a double major in material science and computer science with a concentration in AI. So I came from the AI background, and also you might be knowing that Caltech, California Institute of Technology, you might have heard about it from Big Bang Theory, I guess. That's where most people have seen it. But they also manage JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is where all the satellites for NASA are designed and run from, right? So there's a lot of satellite stuff going on. There's a lot of AI stuff. But then where this got interesting to me is from the story I told you earlier about traveling in India. And then I put this all together, and then we started working. And of course, it started initially as a side hustle. It did start as a side hustle. Since then, happily, it has grown, and has grown to, as I said, even from the initial water angle, from helping farmers grow more with less water, we had grown to thousands of farmers. That's when I decided, let's rethink what's going on here. How can we actually reach 100 million, not just thousands, 100 million? We shifted the business model, and now, as I mentioned to you, we are pretty much closing a funding round the next 1 week or 1.5 weeks, and stay tuned for the news on that as well.
I'm curious how you bridge the gap. So, you obviously had some connection to AI and technology related to satellites, and you have this idea after traveling, related to water and carbon. So how do you bridge that gap? Did you need to bring in experts from different, disciplines to help understand how you can take AI and actually, analyze data and utilize that information to then produce outcomes? Or was it something that you did the research and had to, bridge that gap yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's not been a very linear journey, I guess. From well, with most startups, it's usually not a linear journey. It's a weird zigzag motion. But in our case, in our case, we've really benefited from the kinds of partners that we've built up over time, the network of partners that we as a company have developed. So those partners working alongside, so we primarily work through partners and ground partners. And those partners, going alongside those partners, has contributed extensively to our own knowledge, and of course also helps them to grow their knowledge and helps us to reach more farmers and understand what's going on with more lands, more reach around the world. So it's been really enabled by the partners and the partnerships. And coming back to the point that you mentioned about the technology, certain pieces of how things work and how things are finally put together have been literally inspired by talking directly to farmers and also talking to the partners who work with the farmers. There's many things that are many features, many ways in which the technology works, many different aspects end up being directly. So this goes back to your typical customer discovery in a startup, I guess. But here it's customer discovery both directly with the farmers and also in certain cases intermediated by large-scale partners who can reach large numbers of farmers faster. But basically, going back to your point, that all goes back into developing the technology and enabling us to come up with the right kind of technology that can actually scale and can actually work in these kinds of contexts. It all goes back to the customer, most important person.
Now, in this type of technology business, was there an MVP, something that you were able to take out and validate the marketplace with?
Yes, yeah. So that's what. So of course, it's been a very non-linear journey, as I said. But here's how we initially started. The MVP was a very basic smartphone app that gave very basic information to the end user on how much they need to water their plants on any given day. Very, very basic. So that was the very, very initial MVP. We got several hundreds of users, but we kind of got stuck there because we soon learned that it's not possible to build a scaling kind of thing with the farmers and throughout the world. So it's hard to scale like Snapchat or Facebook in these kinds of situations. Kind of obviously, I guess. But back then, like I was a naive late teenager, I'd say, and as a result, we believed that we could make it go viral just like that, and that did not happen. So that's how we started. But we learned a lot from even that initial experiment from the several hundreds of people who actually used the app. We learned a lot, went back, created a more refined product, reached more folks, built more partnerships, used those partnerships to reach even more farmers and even more end users. And then now, of course, we're transitioning those partnerships to a carbon model, and that has enabled us actually to reach all the way from where we were with those few hundreds of users all the way to 3 million acres of actual land producing carbon credits and or otherwise, and probably another like several hundred thousands of acres using ConserWater directly. So that it's been a non-linear journey, and I guess like most startups are not completely linear and very simple to understand. So it's been non-linear. It's been a lot of learning, some pivoting here and there, but right now probably we're at the place where things are starting to make sense, and we're able to actually navigate and try to build something that goes beyond just thousands of users, but to hundreds of thousands and millions. So right now we are actually in the process of finishing up recruiting like 100,000 farmers in a few different geographies. So So that is that is a trajectory. We want to be able to scale. And MVP, obviously, very important to doing that. But then, since the non-linear story, the MVP taught us some things, and then the next iteration taught us more things. Next iteration taught us even more things, and it keeps going.
That's how it works, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious if it could ever expand into the residential market, that people that have home gardens, or is there just not enough of a carbon offset to really allow that to be sold?
Well, well, some people, they like to do those kinds of things just because they want to do something good for the planet. Of course, like from the point of view of producing a scalable carbon sequestration, probably there isn't as much lawns out there. But then, of course, there are some folks who are very passionate about the stuff and are interested in doing. Yeah, so same things can be applied to the home market, but it's not necessarily like we don't need to necessarily sell it to a third party beyond there. It's for your own. It's for your own
Right.
interest in sequestering CO2. So there is potential there as well. Yes, yeah. At the moment, we're more focused on unlocking large scale carbon removal, unlocking like megaton today and future gigaton scale carbon removal. So that's for context. We could be removing 20% of the world's of the humanity's yearly CO2 emission every year from the atmosphere. That's 9 gigatons. We want to reach a gigaton scale in the next few years. Today, we're on the megaton scale. And that will enable us to really, move the needle on climate change.
It's fascinating. So it sounds like you raised some funding.
Yes, that's happening right now. So technically, we're just like finalizing how things are happening with the fundraise in terms of the actual implementation. But where that is happening right now, and we're going to announce a funding round probably in the next week or week and a half. So stay tuned for the news.
Yeah, that's exciting. So congrats. I was curious, what was it like pitching? I mean, this is a complex solution, solving big, important challenges in the world. What was that like pitching this solution? How was it received? What was the approach? And what did
Yeah. So I guess what I've found at least is make sure that you're pitching to the right person. I guess that's generally true for every single startup, every single concept, every single idea. You don't want to be pitching to someone who's not necessarily, you don't want to be pitching to a partner at a VC who is not actually in your field, and then it's just going to stall with that person, right? So you got to find the right people to pitch to, and then pitch them correctly. Well, luckily, like right now, there's a growing interest again in climate tech. You might have heard climate tech thrown around quite a bit recently. Yeah. There's a growing interest in climate tech and in finding solutions for the climate, and that's what we do, and that we do it quite directly. So there's a growing interest in that, obviously. With that said, again, like there is some added complexity in our system because we have this technological element that a lot of typical VCs, they don't have the ability to actually evaluate the technology directly. It's very hard for them. So then we did have to pitch quite a bit, right? We did, just like how you hear from all of the Silicon Valley stories. I pitched 100 VCs or something. Like, okay, I probably didn't pitch 100 exactly, but probably like close up to there in terms of total VCs pitched in the process. So yeah, it's there's a lot of pitching you need to do, but again, I feel that if you just pitch to the right person, it'll work out correctly. And then of course there's also a timing aspect, right? You need to pitch it to the right person at the right time. Luckily, as I said, this is the time right now where people are actually interested in climate tech and in finding solutions to help the planet. So timing is good. And once you pitch the right person, that is the way to go. And that is what we have been doing. But of course, like due to COVID, it's been really, really hard to network and to find the right people to pitch to. But luckily, we have been able to. And luckily, even cold mails are probably better received right now during COVID than they ever were, because people are receptive to hearing from other folks. out there.
Speaking of that, how did COVID affect your business? And, just generally, how do you tend to handle big sweeping impacts that are, out of your control?
Yeah, so we usually try to adapt and adapt in the right ways and adapt in the best ways. In our case, the pivot to carbon removal, it happened directly during the beginning of COVID. So that is when we kind of had a chance to so there isn't as much travel anymore, and everyone's at home, right? So there's a longer time to introspect and see what is going on. Where are we today? I guess many companies did that probably during the same period, I'd assume. And of course, some companies, they ran out of money, unfortunately. But others definitely pivoted and made it to a cleaner place. So that's what we've been trying to do. So it is probably directly influenced by COVID, probably. Of course, you can't do a counterfactual analysis, but probably COVID has a strong influence in us shifting our business model, because that's when we really sat down, thought about what's going on. What are we doing? How can we actually achieve the goals, the mission that we set out to achieve before? Why are we not meeting that mission? How can we shift things to meet that mission? And we started going from there, and we shifted the business model and started heading in this direction. And it's been a much faster growing direction now. So that's where that's happened. And obviously we started fundraising just like a few months ago, and right in the midst of United States' second wave. So still we did it, and it is because of how we refocused ourselves and focus on what is the best for us to do at the current moment, and what is the best way to reach the objectives that we have and make it happen. So despite COVID, we've managed actually to make things go correctly and to make things go in an accelerated fashion. And I'd say thanks to COVID, actually, in a strange way, because it gave us a good chance to introspect and figure out what exactly we should do in order to stay focused in one direction.
I'm always interested in marketplaces. I find the concept interesting because, as I've worked with companies over the years, when you're dealing with a marketplace, you have typically two separate audiences.
Right.
They may need different marketing. They may need different features, and you kind of have to build them at the same time.
Right.
What's been your experience and I guess insight in building a marketplace solution?
Right. Yeah. So in our case, it's an iterative process, as probably is with any marketplaces. You focus on one side, you build it out. You focus on the next side, you build out. Focus on one side, you build out. Focus on the next side. So that is a process. So once we actually started with this redesign to a marketplace, we initially started trying to see where is the demand side, and started to study the demand side and tried to get a demand going. And it turned out that the demand was actually relatively fast to get because there's so many organizations interested in carbon removal and those kinds of things. So we're kind of also helped in our marketing by macro effects of what people everywhere think about and what people think should be done for the climate. So there's macro effects that help us with that. But of course, marketing, yes, there's a slightly different marketing that goes out to the buyers of the carbon credits as opposed to people who are generating carbon credits. The marketing going out to the buyers is around, this is a way for you to remove CO2 at the lowest cost while helping farmers around the world who are some of the worst affected by COVID, and you have all this opportunity to produce all sorts of co-benefits, like reduce desertification in some parts of the world, reduce pollution in some major cities that comes from agricultural waste burning. All sorts of things are all sorts of co-benefits, all sorts of environmental justice outcomes. We're able to enable all those things, and that's the kind of message that goes out to the corporates. Well, of course, to the farmers, slightly different message around this is an opportunity for you to improve your land's fertility and also increase your income substantially. through the carbon credits that are being produced. So there's a slightly different message, of course, but we have kind of been helped by our timing in making the right message, because the message about doing something about climate action is already up there in all of the corporate boardrooms. And when we come in with our message, it's very easily just sinks in with what the corporates want to do, what the corporations want to do. So it fits in directly on the demand side. And on the sell side, like when you say you're going to pay farmers extra for doing something, extra income for them, there's always a much greater interest to do things much faster. So all those things come together and enable us to build out both sides fast.
I assume most corporations are familiar with the concept of buying, carbon credits, but on the other side, I'm curious, and you can tell me if that's true or not, but on the other side, are farmers familiar with the concept of selling, and do you need to educate them on that?
Well, yeah, so they're not quite familiar with the concept of selling, right? So that's if what we were doing already existed, then we would not need to exist. So they are clearly not familiar with the concept of selling carbon credits on the farmer's side. There is some education involved, and there is some education involved on how do they actually increase soil carbon. That's usually done by our partners on the ground. The several partners we have that actually work with large numbers of farmers individually on the ground. So they enable that to happen by working with the farmers. But then again, it's a very simple message. We're not telling the farmers about complex things like future delivery, futures contracts, options. Oh, no, we're not telling them all of these complicated market terms, commodity market terms. No, we're giving them a very simple message. You increase soil carbon, do what you do best, build up your plants and build up that biomass and increase soil carbon, help to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Do what you do best. We will pay you for that increase in soil carbon after we're able to sell that increase to the corporates, to the companies, and that's it. So we give them a very simple message. They don't need to, of course, they're welcome to learn about all the complexities that come with the commodity market in carbon, but that's optional. And it starts from a very simple message that we're able to bring additional value to you from these kinds of ways, and we enable that entire process.
As the founder and CEO, I would like to hear a little bit about your team. It looks like on LinkedIn you guys are hiring as well. But before we get to that, I would like to hear, where are you spending most of your time and effort as the founder and CEO right now with the business?
So let's start with that piece. So I would consider myself both the CEO and also the technical lead. So I'm at this stage, I'm doing both. So right now, my time is probably split up some other than talking to VCs. So you should put that in a separate bucket. Things that are actually building the business in terms of business development and in terms of technology development, I'd say it's probably 50-50 at the moment between business development and technology development. And then within business development, there's supply side development, and then there's demand side development, because it's a marketplace. So that split is also there, but that split fluctuates depending on where we are at the moment. Are we supply short? Are we demand short? Right now, we are really working on getting more certified supply, supply that is certified through third-party programs that we are able to work and create. We have real supply shortage, so we're trying to scale up that supply. So that's where most of that business development time goes to. So that's how I typically organize my time. And then, of course, on our team, we do have other folks who are very focused on other business development aspects. Like we have people in a few different parts of the world who are focused on those particular parts of the world. Like, for example, we have a business development lead for India. We have a business development lead for Europe, Middle East, Africa. And of course, there's Latin America and the US, but I tend to take care of that myself directly for the most part, at least as of today. but we are hiring for further extension of these work, these things, and also hiring for further technical things. So if anyone in your audience is interested in really moving the needle on climate change fast, and working in a fast-growing startup that's already working with the various Fortune 500 companies on the demand side, and also lots of land on the supply side, they're invited to reach out and convey their interest in being a part for moving the needle on climate change. So that's an open request and offer for people in your audience to reach out if they're interested. So so right now, really, we are in a fast growth mode. So we are actually trying to hire much faster now that we also have that funding lined up, and all these things coming together.
It's great.
So what is that? I'm kind of curious from, especially because a lot of our audience are founders and folks is, how do you picture leveraging that funding to scale the company? What's the game plan from we've certified funding, and now what do we do?
Yeah, so a significant piece of the funding right now, what we're trying to do is we are building out a much larger software infrastructure, actually, to enable the generation and certification and measurement of these outcomes, especially soil carbon and carbon sequestration outcomes, much faster. So right now we have a certain kind of bootstrapped infrastructure that kind of works, is kind of slow, and is kind of not that great. We are in the process of scaling that up so that we can do things at a much faster, much larger level for many different geographical regions around the world. Like, for example, right now we have like 1 million acres in Mexico, similar size situation in India, slightly smaller in East Africa, but all over, like we have a lot of work going on around the world. If we were to use our current infrastructure to do things, it would take us many months to get analyses out of it for that kind of scale in terms of land. We are in the process of scaling up all of that software infrastructure and writing the software to do that. So that is a significant portion of where the current piece of the funding will go to. But there's also a significant, there's also certain business development and a furthering of the business that will happen, and of course marketing that will also happen to accelerate both the demand side and the supply side. But overall, it's a very interesting time, a great time of growth at ConserWater, or I should say Bhumitra, our new name.
I was kind of curious, when you talk about carbon credits and your AI measuring it, does it need to be certified by a third party, or how does that work to make it something that can actually be sold?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are definitely organizations out there that are operating in various scales that sell carbon credits, not necessarily always from agriculture, but from various other sources that they're not necessarily certified, but are certified by their own technology or themselves. What we have found actually is that most companies, they like to have a third-party certification that comes from a nonprofit, because we're for-profit. It's our motive to generate more carbon credits. Right. Is that necessarily the right motive for someone who's trying to produce a fully standardized carbon credit that can be sold at scale and produce these environmental outcomes? Probably not on its own, because our motive is actually to generate more carbon credits as a whole. So there are nonprofits who come up with these standards, or in some cases governments. Governments in where there's carbon tax regulation, the governments come up with the regulations of how you actually produce these. So using our technology, we're able to quantify everything, which is the hard part with getting anything certified. But once we quantify, what happens is we're able to work with these non-profit standards and apply that standard to the credit after they undergo the audit through the nonprofits or through the government regulatory body in some cases. So that once that nonprofit approval is there, then, and as long as the nonprofit is like an internationally recognized nonprofit in this space, then of course all the clients, all the companies are very interested in that kind of credit because then they say it's third-party validated by a nonprofit that does not have a financial motive in trying to say there's more credits here than we're actually use. So once we have that third-party approval, it's great to go. It's a commodity at that point, just like wheat or corn or electricity. It becomes a commodity product that we're able to sell at a much greater scale. So it's yeah.
Now, have you had to deal with a lot of, government regulation or anything related to, I guess, different cultures or countries as you've been building this?
Of course, all the time. Yeah. So, of course, for each, depending on different, I think the culture aspect is probably the most interesting one. Depending on how people's cultures are built, they use technology, interact with technology in different ways, and their ability to actually adopt, or their interest in adopting new kinds of practices, new kinds of technologies, new kinds of efficient ways of doing things, it all varies with their culture, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And we try to kind of mitigate for that by having local partners, partners who really understand their communities and really understand how their communities think. And by working with those kinds of partners, we are able to we are able to surmount many of these things. The partners are our translators, if you may, both literally and also figuratively. Literally translating into foreign languages, figuratively translating into the culture that's present there, and understanding what's going on locally.
Adith, where do you see your product moving in the next year to, let's say, 3 years? What is the vision, the game plan, now that you have some funding and a lot of stuff on the horizon? Kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, so the vision is really to the vision is really by the end of the decade to be doing things at a greater than a gigaton scale in terms of carbon credit and the carbon removal generation happening. So really moving the needle on climate change. That is the vision in the long term. The short term, right now we are in the process of getting that third-party certification for millions of credits right now. So millions of tons of carbon removal, millions of tons of CO2 removed from the atmosphere are in the various stages of being accredited, and that is really the game plan right now, is to create that value. The game plan right now is to completely standardize all of our process, that we can repeatedly create millions and millions and millions of tons of carbon removal fast and at scale, and from our existing partners, just from our existing partners we have today, who have all these resources. So that is the game plan right now, is this year and early part of next year, millions and millions of tons created, certified, and sold. And then taking that and then scaling that, making it more efficient, scaling that within the existing geographies, but also new geographies where it becomes extremely interesting as well. Like, for example, I think this goes back to a piece of your old question that I did not answer, but there's certain countries that are also incorporating carbon credits directly into their carbon tax programs, directly for paying carbon taxes. Like, for example, in Canada, it's a good example right here across the border, and much closer for you in Cleveland. In Canada, actually, they have said that soil carbon sequestration is a valid way to meet their carbon tax obligations. So that's happening next year. Actually, in Canada is when they'll actually become official that you can do these things, and we are well poised for that as well. So the real goal here is to generate almost all of the carbon removal that the world needs, and at scale and at the lowest cost, while driving huge impact back to the farmers around the world, and really achieving that triple bottom line.
I'm kind of interested, being that you have the background in AI, it's such a huge buzzword right now. What do you define, or how do you look at AI as being, truly artificial intelligence when it's involved in a product? And what does and then also, what do you see the trajectory of AI in the next couple of years?
Yeah, sure. So AI has become like a really broad term recently. So it's good to jump in and say, are we talking about AI in its most broadest sense, or are we talking about machine learning specifically within AI? Are we talking about deep learning within machine learning? They will all have slightly different trajectories, but in terms of general machine learning, in terms of machine learning, we're probably seeing a lot of single purpose or specific purpose machine learning technologies that are really gaining a lot of traction in very specific fields. Like, for example, what we do, I would say it's kind of, although the applications for the technology itself is very general purpose, the actual measurement, the actual prediction by the AI is a single purpose thing that is very specifically for soil carbon or soil moisture or nutrients. It's kind of a single purpose AI in that sense. And those kinds of single purpose AIs have been seeing a lot of increasing traction throughout many different fields. Of course, there's our own concept with carbon sequestration. There's many folks doing related things in the healthcare space where they have single purpose AIs for achieving certain single purpose things, and so on. So there's single purpose AIs on making processes either more efficient or unlocking processes that were never possible before through single purpose AIs. That's what we'll probably see for the next several years. And it'll be a very long time before we ever see a general purpose AI, like a robot that can think for itself and just do everything on its own. Now, it'll be probably an extensively long time before we see that, but we're right now seeing a huge proliferation of these kinds of single purpose AIs that are able to do certain tasks really good and unlock new tasks that we were never able to do before.
And you're talking in healthcare as just an example for our audiences, X-rays for cancer scans that are able to, look at images at bulk and be able to do a better job of
detecting cancer. Yeah. That's single purpose kind of AI. Also similar to what we do, like instead of X-rays, we look at satellite images across many different wavelengths, not one wavelength, many different wavelengths. And then we're trying to detect soil carbon. So it's kind of similar.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar.
I see that. Just kind of shifting gears as we're, winding down a little bit. I'm curious about what's been your biggest learning lesson or takeaway from having started a business, and usually that comes from a mistake or challenge, but what have you learned and what can you share with our audience that's been a big insight or learning lesson?
Probably that it's always way harder than it seems. It's always doing things. It's always ends up being way harder than it usually seems. In most cases, and like some cases maybe not, but in most cases, when you look at other folks, you probably feel like they are doing things extremely efficiently and they're doing things really well. It's always way harder than it seems, and it boils down at the end of the day to just perseverance and being focused and doing things carefully, timely, and appropriately to really get the key result that you are aiming after, and not worrying about all the other side results that are not as important, but just focusing on the key attribute that really matters, whatever your milestone is. So that's what I've sort of learned the hard way by going through various processes. It's very important to kind of focus on what is the most important thing to be building at any given point in time, and focus on that most important aspect for your milestones. And then, of course, beyond that, it's always good to budget out extra resources for everything, because it's going to be harder than you expect to actually make things happen, especially when those aspects involve external organizations or people outside of your organization, people beyond in another partner organizations, or even with clients or with buyers or sellers. They will take their own time to do things. So we have to budget for all of that and make sure that we're able to do things efficiently bringing everyone together and producing the most value towards the singular or a few goals that we set, and not be worried about everything else. Just focus on what is important.
Yeah, the myth of the overnight success. I always love those infographics and articles about really successful entrepreneurs that failed 7 times, but nobody ever talks about that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
No, that's great.
So, Adith, we have some exciting stuff here on the horizon. Where can our followers, before we dive into our last question or two, where can the people who are watching follow you, learn about what's going on with ConserWater / Bhumitra? Is that the new name?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So you can visit our websites. Obviously, you can visit conserwater.com, boomitra.com, BOOMITRA, boomitra.com. You can visit that as well, and obviously you can find us on all social media: LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and not yet TikTok. We have not done TikTok yet.
You gotta get
Maybe.
on there.
Maybe you guys are on TikTok.
Not yet. I keep getting pushed to do it, and I haven't done it yet.
Okay. So mainly Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can also follow me directly on any of those platforms as well. So that's where you can learn more, and stay tuned for the exciting updates that are coming up.
Yeah, we certainly will. It's great.
So, just one more question to close on. We're always talking to really technical folks that are on the bleeding edge of things. I'm kind of curious I've been asking everyone this kind of same question. What do you see as the most transformative technology for the world in the next 5 to 10 years? What do you see being just of the greatest impact for us as a global society?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back and say AI. Right? I'm going to go back and say AI because AI, although I told you like most folks are doing single purpose AIs, and that's what's gaining a lot of traction. AI itself, in a way, it's a general purpose technology because it can be applied in so many different fields for producing single purpose, either efficiency improvement or a whole new capability that you've never seen before in so many different fields. And we haven't really even realized what is the potential across all of these different fields, be it healthcare, be it in remote sensing, in satellite analysis, be it in just in regular SaaS world, whatever is the case. We have not even seen what is the full potential yet, because there's so many new applications coming out, so many better ways of training AI models coming out from academia as well, all that coming together and producing all sorts of new and wonderful potential ways to use technology. Of course, there's also the bad side of how AI is enabling us to be tracked worse than before. But then again, there's also all of these benefits. So be it a good way or a bad way, AI is probably the most transformative technology. It's already been transformed over the past 5 years, and will continue to be very transformative over the next 10 years as well.
I mean, like a lot of things, AI is a tool to be used, and whether it's used good or bad.
Yes, exactly.
It's a scary thing.
Well, very cool, Adith. This has been fascinating. We've really enjoyed our conversation here today. So thank you for joining and sharing with us and our audience. And we'll certainly be paying attention to what what you're up to. And we'd probably like to have you back at some point to hear about the growth and development and what you guys have been able to do. So again, thanks for your time here today. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We will see you next time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you, everybody.